From the San Antonio Express News, I'm Joy Marie Scott, and this is In Depth, a weekly interview program with Express News journalists who break down their in-depth reporting on issues affecting the city and Bexar County. Harlan Dale Independent School District will soon likely have a state-appointed board. Texas Education Agency officials moved forward Tuesday to replace all elected trustees following the recommendation of a scathing investigator's report released earlier this month. The board has vowed to continue fighting intervention amid suspicions in the community of TEA's motive. Education reporter Krista Taralva broke the story on the Harlandale ISD takeover, and she's here to explain the details behind the latest developments of the ongoing fight. So, Krista, welcome to In Depth. Give us the background behind the TEA's investigation in 2017, what led to it, and what did the report conclude?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so, back in 2017, the TEA received a bunch of complaints about how the board and the superintendent were going out to bid, their practices with contracting, procurements. There were also accusations of nepotism. There were accusations that the board was violating the Open Meetings Act. So some of these allegations date back really far, like a decade or more, and some of them are fairly more recent. So the TEA started their investigation in 2017, and they released their preliminary findings late last year, their final findings this month. Then it went to the commissioner, and he was the one that made the final decision, and that's where we are today. So the allegations of nepotism, there was no finding. They said they couldn't. They didn't have enough to make a finding. But the Open Meetings Act violations, the contract practices, the contract procurements, all of that, the commissioner believed that there were violations of. So now he announced his intentions to replace the elected board of trustees and appoint a board of managers, which he appoints, replace the superintendent, Ray Madrigal, who is homegrown. He's, a product of Harlan Dale ISD. He's been there forever. Appointing a conservator and lowering the accreditation of the district. And that one was actually something that motivated a lot of candidates to run in this most recent election. There were two of the new board members had won in May, and they ran because they were hoping to dissuade the commissioner from lowering the accreditation.
So Mike Morath, the Texas Education Commissioner, as you said, he lowered the district's accreditation to accredited warned. Right. What does that mean?
Okay, so you're either in Texas accredited or accredited warned, accredited probation, or not accredited, meaning that the TEA doesn't recognize the district. And what happens at that point is it's up to the commissioner, whether or not he wants to close the district. We've seen that in a couple of other instances around the state. Marlin ISD near Waco currently is their accreditation is revoked, and it's pending right now with the commissioner, whether or not he'll close down that district. So Harlandale right now is just on that first step, accredited warned. So they have an opportunity to address these issues that were found in the final report and correct them. And if they don't, then they go down another notch and then down one more notch.
And what happens when they go down the last notch?
The commissioner can decide to close them down.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, as we know, school board officials, they're elected.
Correct.
And what does it mean when the TEA is going to just replace and appoint, appoint people to be on the board and as well as replace the superintendent? What do the locals that, voted, how are they feeling and what does that mean for them?
So that's where the residents in Harlandale really become impassioned, because no matter where you are in this fight, whether you believe that the superintendent and the trustees have been doing wrong things, or if you believe that they're not doing wrong things, nobody wants to see the board taken over. At least my reporting has reflected that nobody wants to see the board be appointed by the state, because that's when you lose your local control and your local representation. I had a resident email me this morning in response to my story, and she was one of the very first ones to make a complaint to the TEA. And she said in this email, she's sad because she was rooting for the superintendent, Ray Madrigal. Again, he graduated from this district. He's some of these people who made these complaints went to school with him. And they don't want to see that local representation dissolve. What happens now is Mike Morath picks his appointees. And he said in this letter that the majority will come from within the district. But legally, not all of them have to come from the district. And a lot of people in Harlandale are really proud of their district, and they don't want outsiders to come in and make decisions for them. They think they know what's best for their district. So people on either side get really impassioned about this.
So how common is this sort of intervention from the TEA? How often does it happen, and what are other cases?
Well, in Bexar County recently, it's felt pretty common because over in Southside and in Edgewood a few years ago, the state came in and did the same thing. Also, a few years ago, the state came in South San ISD. They were appointed a conservator, and she was removed after things seemed to be back on track. And now again, TEA is investigating in South San. So in Bexar County, it feels rather common. In the state, currently, there are 4 school districts that are under state control, and 2 of them are in Bexar County. If Harlan Dale is taken over, then that'll be 3. But otherwise, this is really unusual. Again, the TEA has control over 4 in the whole state. So that shows, how unusual it is.
What is the school board going to do next? And how much is this kind of costing on the taxpayers? Like what's their commitment here?
So I'm going to answer that in reverse order, if you don't mind. Yeah. So residents at every single meeting that I attend, their first question is, how much are you guys spending on this? And so I put in some open records requests. And since December, which is when the state issued their preliminary report in November, and in December, Harlan Dale trustees voted to hire an additional lawyer and fight the findings in the preliminary report. So since December, they have paid $71,605 in legal fees. I recently submitted another open records request dating back to when the investigation started in August of 2017, and I haven't yet received that back from the district. So TBD on that. And as far as next steps, the district has one more opportunity to appeal the commissioner's decision. So by July 9th, they can ask for a formal review of his decision to appoint a board of trustees and an informal review on the issue of the conservator. So after that review, then we'll know if Harlan Dale is going to be taken over or not officially.
So again, what can you just talk a little bit more about the reaction in the Harlan Dale community, the concern over how much this is costing, this, legal fight is costing and diverting resources, and, how do the residents feel and the teachers?
Sure. So, people in the community that I've talked to are suspicious that TEA is trying to force a consolidation. Bexar County has something like 18 school districts, and legislators have talked for years about whether or not that many is justified. Earlier this year, Representative Diego Bernal said publicly that he doesn't think it is justified. A few years ago, Representative Roland Gutierrez commissioned a study to look into consolidating the districts. So that whole conversation is one that's always lingered in districts like Harlan Dale and Edgewood and all those Southside districts. And one resident who spoke out at one of the last meetings, Victor Salcido, he's actually a former teacher in the district and a former board member, accused TEA of picking on those poor, mostly minority school districts in our area. So there's some suspicion as to TEA's motivations. Representative Leo Pacheco attended the special meeting after the final report came out earlier this month, and he's a really proud product of Harlan Dale. He graduated from Harlan Dale. I think his parents even graduated from Harlan Dale, and he talked about a time when Harlan Dale was like its own little town, and residents don't want, quote unquote, bureaucrats coming in and running the district. But for the people who complain to TEA, some of those people have been going religiously to those meetings for years, and they feel like they gave the board an opportunity to address these concerns before complaining to TEA. Some of those concerns, like about the contracting with Jasmine Engineering, for example, the Express News reported years ago, before I was even here, before the TEA opened an investigation. So those people, those residents feel like the board was given an opportunity to fix things and didn't. And that's why we're here. And so the word I just kept hearing yesterday when I was talking to those people who made those initial complaints was sad. They didn't want to see this happen. They felt like they tried to avoid it. And they're sad that this is the conclusion.
Krista, clearly there's a lot more to the story as it evolves. What are your final thoughts? Do you have any idea if there's going to be maybe a criminal case against Ray Madrigal and the board? And kind of where's this fight heading in the short term? And what questions are you going to be following and trying to tackle?
Yeah, so that's a really good point you brought up about the possible criminal violations. In each of these reports, there's been mention of possible criminal violations. And the TEA has essentially said, we've completed our report, our findings are public. It's up to the appropriate agencies to look into this and see if there's a crime that was committed. I've reached out to the Texas Attorney General's office. They haven't responded to me. I've reached out to the U.S. Attorney's office. They haven't responded to me. And I reached out to the Bexar County District Attorney's office, and they did respond to me and said essentially that they take cases that are brought to them. So basically, they're waiting for something to be referred to them. My concern is if nobody brings it to them, does it never get reviewed by a law enforcement agency or a prosecuting agency? I don't know. I don't know what happens next. That's, I think, a question that's worth pursuing. But, I am still waiting on my open records request from the district to find out how much has been spent on fighting this, because that's the number one question that I've heard at these meetings. And the residents' questions are kind of what's guiding me in my next step. And that's the big one.
Thank you to San Antonio Express News education reporter Krista Torralva for joining us on this week's episode of In Depth. You can read more of Krista's coverage on the Harlan Dale ISD, the full TEA report, and a letter from the Texas Commissioner, Mike Morath. You can also read Krista's work on school districts and public universities in the San Antonio and Bexar County area by subscribing to expressnews.com. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Joy Marie Scott.